The wind picks up. It carries the abrasive hiss of sand against dry wood. Notice the sound design here. There is no sweeping orchestral score to guide your emotions. Only the wind. Only the creak of a loose sign swinging on rusted hinges above the saloon. The camera lingers on the sign. The paint has long since blistered and peeled away, leaving the letters completely illegible. It doesn't matter what the place is called. Names hold no weight in this purgatory. We cut to the shadowed porch of a dilapidated livery stable. The transition is stark from blinding glare to suffocating darkness. The camera tracks slowly along the warped floorboards, past an overturned tin bucket, past a coil of frayed hemp rope until it finds him. He sits on a splintered wooden barrel. His posture is not one of rest, but of collapse. Gravity seems to pull at him harder than the objects around him. His boots, heavy with dried mud and scuffed down to the raw gray leather, are planted flat on the dirt. The camera moves up. Faded denim, a heavy canvas duster stained with sweat horse grease and darker older patches that tell a violent history. Watch the way the light catches the frayed rim of his hat. It is pulled low, plunging the upper half of his face into absolute shadow, but the camera focuses on what we can see. The jawline is tight, the muscles corded and rigid beneath the skin. A thick, unkempt beard masks the hollows of his cheeks. A solitary drop of sweat traces a path down his sun-baked neck, disappearing into the grimy collar of his shirt. He does not wipe it away. He does not flinch. For a long-stretched minute, the only indication that he is a living, breathing creature is the slow mechanical rise and fall of his chest. He is a man hollowed out. The film doesn't hand us a flashback to explain his ruin. We read it in the absolute stillness. A feral dog trots into the street ribs, pressing sharply against its mangy coat. The animal pauses, sniffs the arid air, and looks toward the shadowed porch. The dog lowers its head, tucks its tail, and scurries away instinctually, recognizing the aura of a predator, even a dormant one. Slowly the man's right hand shifts. The camera provides an extreme close-up of his fingers. The skin is cracked like the alkali desert floor outside. Calluses thick as horn cover his palms. The knuckles are swollen, marked by pale, jagged scars. His hand moves toward his waist. But notice the detail: there is no gun belt. There is no iron holstered at his hip. The hand hovers over the empty space for a fraction of a second, an ingrained muscle memory reaching for a phantom weight. The fingers curl into a fist, trembling slightly. The tremor is not from fear. It is the nervous system of a machine built for violence, misfiring in the overwhelming silence. He redirects his hand to the inside pocket of his duster. He withdraws a glass flask. The leather wrapping is worn smooth by years of friction. He unscrews the brass cap with his thumb. The metallic scrape cuts sharply through the quiet. He brings the flask to his lips. He doesn't drink for pleasure. Watch his throat. He takes a long, punishing pull, swallowing the cheap burning liquor like foul medicine. He lowers the flask. He does not cough. He does not grimace. His expression remains carved from stone. A man steps out from the saloon across the street, a local. The camera shifts to a wide shot, capturing the vast, dusty distance between the two figures. The local carries a wooden crate. He glances toward the livery stable. He sees the figure sitting in the shadows. We see the local's steps falter. His shoulders stiffen. He averts his gaze, immediately adjusting his path to give the livery a much wider berth. He walks faster, his boots crunching loudly on the dry dirt, eager to put distance between himself and the man on the barrel. The man on the porch registers the local's reaction, but his gaze remains fixed on the dust at his feet. He is a ghost haunting his own life. The town tolerates him because they fear him, and they fear him because he possesses the eyes of someone who has already crossed over to the other side. The camera pushes in again, tighter this time. We finally see beneath the brim of the hat. His eyes. They are a washed-out slate gray. They do not reflect the harsh sunlight. They absorb it. There is a profound, echoing emptiness in that stare. He looks at his own hands resting heavily on his knees. He turns them over, studying the palms. We see a subtle tightening in his jaw. The phantom weight at his hip seems to grow heavier, pulling him further down. He stands. The movement is stiff, deliberate. We hear the pop of joints and the creak of worn leather. He is a large man, broad-shouldered, casting a long, imposing shadow that stretches out into the sunlit dirt like a dark stain. He takes a step forward. The camera tracks his boots, heavy, resolute. He walks to the edge of the porch and stops exactly at the boundary line between the shade and the blistering sun. He reaches into his pocket again and pulls out a small block of pine and a bone-handled pocket knife. The blade clicks open. The sound is sharp, authoritative. He begins to whittle. He does not look at what he is carving. His eyes remain fixed on the empty, vibrating horizon. The knife slices through the wood with practiced mechanical precision. Shaving after shaving falls to the dusty floorboards. The repetitive motion is a coping mechanism, a physical anchor to keep his hands occupied, to keep them from reaching for the violence they know so intimately. He turns away from the street, retreating deeper into the livery. The camera follows him into the gloom. The air here is thick, choked with the smell of dry hay, ammonia, and old sweat. Shafts of sunlight pierce through the gaps in the tin roof, illuminating swirling columns of dust motes. He walks past rows of empty stalls. The town is dying, and the livery is a wooden skeleton proving its slow decay. Only one horse remains, a massive, heavily scarred roan gelding. The beast stamps its iron-shod hoof as the man approaches. Notice the microscopic change in the man's demeanor. The rigid set of his shoulders relaxes a fraction of an inch. He reaches out, laying a heavy, calloused hand on the horse's neck. He doesn't speak. He doesn't offer hollow affections. He simply runs his hand along the coarse hair, feeling the solid living muscle beneath. The horse lowers its head, nudging his shoulder. It is the only interaction in his world that does not involve fear or bloodshed. He moves to a wooden bucket, lifting a heavy iron pitcher to pour water. The water splashes cold and clear, a stark contrast to the suffocating dust outside. He watches the horse drink. The camera lingers on the water dripping from the animal's dark muzzle. Every sound is amplified in the hollow silence of the barn. The man picks up a stiff, bristled brush. He begins to groom the horse. The strokes are long, firm, and rhythmic. It is another task to fill the endless, agonizing hours. Another way to quiet the deafening noise inside his own head. The camera frames his face through the thick wooden slats of the stall. The shadows stripe across his features, making him look exactly like what he is, a prisoner behind bars. He is trapped here in this rotting town, in this rotting body, bound by a past the film refuses to reveal yet. We don't need to know who he killed or what he lost to end up here. The immense burden is written in the geometry of his posture, in the way he actively avoids looking at his own reflection in the water bucket. He finishes brushing the horse. He steps back, returning the brush to a rusted nail on the wall. He walks back to the front of the stable, back to his wooden barrel, back to the edge of the shadow. He sits. The knife comes out again. The whittling resumes. The cycle of nothingness continues undisturbed until the horizon begins to spit up a cloud of dust. The dust cloud on the horizon does not rush toward the town. It crawls. It is a bruised yellowish bruise against the bleached sky, dragging itself over the alkali flats. The man on the porch does not stop whittling, but the rhythm of his knife changes. A fraction slower, a fraction heavier. The camera tracks his eyes. They remain locked on the distant haze. He reads the desert the way a scholar reads a text. A fast cloud means riders. A steady wide cloud means cattle. This cloud is erratic, broken, stumbling. We hear the wagon long before we see it clearly. A rhythmic, agonizing shriek of ungreased timber and grinding iron rubbing raw against itself. The sound cuts through the dead air of the town, sour and sharp. The camera pans across the street. The few locals who were lingering outside retreat into the shadows. Doors pull shut. Shutters click into place. In a place where the law does not reach, the arrival of strangers brings nothing but a body count or a plague. The wagon materializes from the heat distortion. It is a Conestoga, but stripped of its dignity. The canvas bows are snapped, the fabric torn and flapping like dead skin in the dry wind. The team of mules pulling it are walking corpses, heads bowed so low their muzzles scrape the dirt. Foam cakes their shoulders dried to a crusty white salt. They drag the heavy wooden wheels through the deep ruts of the main street, every step a monumental defiance of gravity. Notice the way the protagonist watches. He does not stand. He does not reach for a weapon. He remains seated on the barrel, the shadow of the livery roof, cutting diagonally across his chest. He wants no part of this. He actively wills the wagon to pass his sanctuary. He demands the world keep moving and leave his hollow existence untouched. But the mules have nothing left. Right in front of the livery, the lead mule buckles. Its knees hit the hardpan with a hollow thud. The entire rig shudders and grinds to a halt. The dust cloud catches up, washing over the wagon, and rolling onto the porch, carrying the distinct coppery scent of fresh blood and the sour tang of infection. The camera pushes in on the driver's seat. A man is slumped forward, the leather reins wrapped tightly around his forearms. He does not move to strike the fallen mule. He simply slides. It happens in agonizing slow motion. Gravity takes him, and he pitches over the side of the wagon, hitting the dusty street like a sack of wet sand. A plume of dirt rises around his motionless body. For a long minute, nothing happens. The wind howls through the torn canvas. The fallen mule wheezes. The protagonist stares at the body in the dirt. The camera gives us a close-up of his hands. The knife halts its carving. The knuckles whiten around the bone handle. A muscle feathers in his jaw. The instinct to act fights a brutal war against the desire to remain dead to the world. He closes the knife with a sharp snap. He stands. The heavy leather of his duster sweeps the floorboards. He steps out of the shadow and into the anvil of the sun. He crosses the street. We follow behind him, the camera tracking at his shoulder, feeling the immense, imposing bulk of the man as he approaches the wreckage. He stands over the fallen driver. We see the truth of the situation. The driver's shirt is soaked black on the left side, a gunshot wound left to fester for days under the desert sun. The man is breathing, but the breaths are wet, ragged gasps pulling through a throat clogged with dust and blood. The protagonist crouches, resting his forearms on his knees. He does not offer comfort. He studies the dying man with the cold, clinical detachment of an undertaker. Then a sound breaks the silence, a scrape of wood against wood from the bed of the wagon. The camera snaps up. The torn canvas parts. A hand grips the wooden frame, small, pale, the fingernails caked with dark grime. A girl emerges. She is perhaps 14. Her dress is a faded, shapeless sack of rough cotton. But look at her eyes. They are wide, feverish, and ancient. They hold the traumatic mileage of someone who has watched the world burn down around her. She holds a rusted double-barrel shotgun. It is too long, too heavy for her skeletal frame. The barrel wavers, pointing down at the protagonist. She doesn't speak. Her lips are cracked and bleeding. Behind her, 3 smaller figures shuffle toward the light. A boy, maybe 10, his face smeared with soot. A younger girl clinging to his shirt. And a toddler, silent and limp, held tightly in the teenager's left arm. 4 motherless children. A dying father in the dirt. The camera cuts to the protagonist's face. The slate-gray eyes narrow. We see the armor crack. The emptiness in his gaze fractures, replaced by a ghost. A heavy, suffocating memory rises behind his eyes. The phantom weight at his hips screams. He stares at the rusted shotgun trembling in the girl's grip, and then he looks at the toddler. He swallows a hard, dry swallow. The dying man on the ground groans. His bloody hand reaches out, fingers scraping weakly across the dirt until they hook into the hem of the protagonist's duster. The grip is impossibly weak, yet it acts as an iron chain anchoring the cowboy to the earth. The protagonist looks down. The driver's eyes flutter open. They are milky, unfocused, staring into the blinding sun. The driver's lips part. A bubble of blood pops on his tongue. The camera pushes in to catch the faint, rattling whisper. No grand speeches, no sweeping pleas, just 2 words pushed out with the very last ounce of air in his ruined lungs. Take them. The fingers slip from the duster. The driver's chest collapses one final time and does not rise. The life leaves him, entering the dry earth below. The silence that follows is heavier than before. It presses down on the street. The teenage girl does not lower the shotgun. The younger children do not cry. They have learned that noise draws wolves. They simply stare at the giant man covered in dust and old blood. The protagonist stands, slowly rising to his full height. He towers over the wagon. He looks at the dead man, then up at the 4 faces framed by the torn canvas. He breathes in the hot, stagnant air, the absolute isolation he built around himself. The fortress of apathy begins to crumble. He steps forward. The girl's finger tightens on the trigger of the shotgun. The hammer is pulled back. We hear the metallic click. Watch the protagonist's movements. He does not raise his hands in surrender. He does not try to soothe her with gentle words. He moves with slow, deliberate inevitability. He reaches up and wraps his massive, scarred hand around the twin barrels of the shotgun. He doesn't yank it away. He simply applies downward pressure. The girl fights him for a second, her frail muscles straining against his immovable strength before she surrenders. The gun lowers. He pulls the weapon from her grip, breaks the action, and ejects the shells onto the dirt. The heavy brass casings hit the ground with a dull thud. He tosses the empty weapon into the back of the wagon. He turns his back on the children. He walks to the rear of the wagon, grabs the wooden tailgate, and pulls out a rusted iron shovel. He walks a dozen paces off the main street, finding a patch of earth near a dead mesquite bush. He begins to dig. The camera stays wide, framing the grim tableau. The dead man in the street, the 4 silent children watching from the wagon, the giant cowboy driving the blade of the shovel into the baked concrete hard soil. Every strike of the iron against the earth is a violent rejection of his own peace. He drives the shovel down. The muscles in his back bunch and flex beneath the heavy duster. He strikes again and again. He is not just burying a stranger. He is burying his own isolation. He digs until the sun begins to bleed red across the jagged peaks, painting the dust with the color of slaughter. The sweat soaks through his shirt, plastering the fabric to his skin. His hands, already thick with calluses, begin to blister and tear against the rough wooden handle of the shovel. He does not stop. He does not drink. He punishes himself with the labor of physical penance for the promise he silently accepted. When the hole is deep enough, he walks back to the street. He bends down, hooking his arms under the dead man's shoulders, and drags the heavy corpse through the dirt. The kids watch the trail of blood and dust their father leaves behind. The protagonist lowers the body into the ground, without a word, without a prayer. He shovels the dirt back, hiding the violence under a mound of dry earth. He throws the shovel back into the wagon. He looks at the teenage girl. She stares back, holding the toddler closer to her chest. The protagonist walks past them, unhitching the exhausted mules from the broken wagon. He leads the animals toward the livery, disappearing into the dark, unwelcoming shadow of the barn. He leaves the children in the wagon under the cooling night sky. The contract is signed in silence. The hollow man now carries the weight of 4 souls. The desert night bleeds its heat into the stars, leaving behind a brittle, bone-deep cold. The camera opens on the interior of the ruined Conestoga wagon. Frost clings to the frayed edges of the canvas. We see the children huddled together, a tangled knot of shivering limbs. Draped over them, completely burying the 2 youngest, is the heavy canvas duster. It bears the distinct scent of horse sweat, old tobacco, and gun oil, but it holds the warmth of a furnace. We cut to the protagonist. He sits on a wooden crate near the open doors of the livery stable, enduring the freezing pre-dawn air in nothing but his faded denim and a thin cotton shirt. He does not rub his arms to generate heat. He sits perfectly still, a stone gargoyle guarding a ruined temple. The camera lingers on his forearms, thick with muscle and layered with pale, jagged scars that stand out sharply against the cold-flushed skin. He watches the breath escape his mouth in slow, measured plumes of white vapor. He is awake. He has been awake all night. Sleep is a luxury afforded to men who do not have ghosts standing at the foot of their beds. Dawn breaks not with a soft glow, but with a harsh, unyielding glare that sets the eastern horizon on fire. The temperature climbs, aggressively shifting from freezing to punishing within an hour. Inside the wagon, the teenager stirs. She pushes the heavy duster aside. The camera tracks her movement as she peers over the splintered wooden sideboard. She expects to find the giant man gone, abandoning them, just as the rest of the world has. Instead, she finds him standing beside a small smokeless fire built from dry mesquite twigs. Notice the tools he uses to prepare their meal. There is no copper pot, no wooden spoon. He holds a massive stag-handled Bowie knife. The blade is 8 inches of dark carbon steel, honed to a razor edge. It is a weapon designed for close-quarters slaughter, for tearing through bone and sinew. Yet the camera gives us an extreme close-up of his hands, using this instrument of death to peel a shriveled, bruised apple. The juxtaposition is jarring. The massive calloused fingers manipulate the small fruit with a meticulous, almost painful precision. He shaves the skin paper-thin, preserving every possible ounce of the flesh. He slices the apple into 4 perfectly equal wedges. He sets the knife down on a flat stone. Beside the apple, he places 4 pieces of hardtack biscuit and a tin cup filled with water from the livery pump. He steps back, retreating into the shadow of the barn, giving them space. The film shows us the wild animal dynamic taking root. He is the alpha predator, stepping away from the kill so the scavengers can feed. The teenager climbs down from the wagon, her bare feet hitting the freezing dirt. She ushers the younger ones out. They approach the flat stone with the hypervigilance of stray dogs. They do not look at the food. They look at the shadows, searching for the man. The camera positions itself behind the protagonist, framing the children through the rough vertical slats of the livery wall. We watch him watching them. The boy, perhaps 10 years old, grabs a piece of the biscuit and shoves it into his mouth, his jaw working frantically against the rock-hard bread. The youngest girl coughs, a deep rattling sound that echoes off the timber walls. The teenager divides the apple slices, handing the largest piece to the toddler, resting on her hip. Watch the protagonist's jaw tighten. A microscopic flinch registers around his slate-gray eyes. This is the weight of innocence. He understands the mechanics of survival. He knows how to bleed a man, how to track a horse across hard rock, how to go a week without water. But he does not know how to cure a child's cough. The realization presses down on his broad shoulders, a burden heavier than any iron he has ever carried. His knuckles whiten as he grips the wooden slat of the stall. The fragility of these 4 lives is an agonizing contrast to his own hardened, broken state. Later, the sun sits high, hammering the town with relentless heat. The protagonist walks down the center of the dusty main street. He does not walk alone. Behind him, trailing like a string of ragged ducklings, are the 4 children. He moves slowly, cutting his long ground-eating stride down to a fraction of its normal pace, so the short legs behind him can keep up. We see the townspeople react. The doors of the saloon remain closed, but the slats of the louver shift. Eyes peer out from the darkness. The blacksmith pauses his hammer, the iron cooling on the anvil, watching the procession with raw disbelief. The hollow man, the town's resident Grim Reaper, is playing shepherd. The camera captures the tension in the air. It is thick, suffocating. The town tolerates him because he is a solitary force of nature, dormant and isolated. But now he is tethered. He has vulnerabilities. He leads them toward the mercantile, a weathered wooden building with a faded painted sign. He steps up onto the boardwalk. The wood groans under his weight. He stops and turns, looking down at the bare, blistered feet of the 10-year-old boy. The skin is cracked and bleeding from the sharp alkali crust of the street. He pushes the door open. A bell rings, a sharp, cheerful sound that feels entirely out of place. The interior smells of cured leather, lye soap, and stale coffee. The shopkeeper, a thin man with a nervous tick in his left eye, stands behind a polished oak counter. He freezes as the massive silhouette fills the doorway. The shopkeeper's gaze darts from the man's scarred face down to the empty space on his hip, and then to the 4 filthy children shuffling in behind him. The protagonist walks to the counter. He reaches into the deep pocket of his canvas duster. The shopkeeper flinches, his hand dropping below the counter, reaching for a hidden scattergun. But the protagonist does not draw steel. He pulls out a small, heavy leather pouch. He unties the rawhide string and upends it onto the oak surface. The camera focuses on the currency: 3 tarnished Mexican silver pesos and a heavy gold double eagle. The gold coin hits the wood with a deep, resonant thud. It is old money. Blood money. The metal is scratched and dulled by time, carrying the silent history of a violent past. He looks directly into the shopkeeper's eyes. The slate-gray stare is flat, dead, offering no room for negotiation. He points a thick, scarred finger at the boots hanging from the ceiling rafters, then at the bolts of cotton cloth stacked on the shelves, and finally at a row of sealed glass jars containing preserved peaches. He does not speak a single word. He doesn't have to. The gold speaks for him. We see the physical toll of this domestic act on the protagonist. The tight confines of the store, the smell of the people, the agonizingly slow process of fitting stiff leather boots onto small, uncooperative feet. He kneels on the floorboards, his massive hands awkwardly manipulating the laces of a child's boot. He pulls the leather tight, perhaps a fraction too tight, drawing a sharp hiss from the boy. He pauses, his hands hovering over the boot, a silent struggle playing out in his posture. He forces his rigid fingers to relax, to soften their grip, tying the knot with a clumsy, unnatural gentleness. They leave the mercantile an hour later. The children wear stiff, unbroken boots and carry small bundles of cloth and food. The protagonist steps back out into the blinding sunlight, pulling the brim of his hat low over his eyes. The glare of the street is blinding. The camera pulls back for a wide shot of the dusty intersection. The town is dead roasting under the midday sun. But something shifts in the atmosphere. The protagonist stops mid-stride. His boots plant firmly into the dirt. The kids bump into the back of his legs, halting behind his massive frame. Watch his posture transform. The awkward, uncomfortable shepherd vanishes. The spine straightens, the shoulders square, the head tilts slightly to the right, presenting a smaller profile. The dormant predator awakens, every muscle fiber coiling tight like a mainspring. The camera follows his line of sight. Down at the far end of the street, tied to the rotting hitching post outside the telegraph office, stands a horse. It is a massive black thoroughbred, a stark contrast to the broken-down Mustangs and mules of this dead town. But it is not the animal that freezes the blood in the protagonist's veins. The camera pushes in, zooming past the dusty street, past the empty wooden barrels, until it frames the horse's left flank. Burned deep into the black hide is a brand, a crude, jagged circle with a broken cross in the center. We cut back to the protagonist's face. The hollow emptiness in his eyes is gone, replaced by a cold, calculating inferno. The jaw muscles cord so tightly they look ready to snap the bone. He recognizes the mark. The ghosts have not just come to haunt him, they have tracked his scent across the alkali flats. The men who ride with that brand do not leave survivors. They do not take prisoners. They burn everything to the ash. He slowly turns his head, looking down at the 4 children standing behind him. The oldest girl clutches the jar of peaches to her chest. The toddler sucks her thumb, staring up at him with wide, unblinking eyes. He looks back at the black horse at the end of the street. The sanctuary is breached. The silence is over. He reaches his right hand down to his waist, his thick fingers brushing against the heavy canvas of his duster, feeling the agonizing absence of the iron he buried so long ago. The phantom weight on his hip is no longer a memory. It is a demand. The past has arrived and it requires blood. The protagonist does not run. Running triggers the prey drive in men who hunt for a living. Watch the mechanical shift in his posture. The coiled mainspring of his aggression deliberately agonizingly unwinds. He exhales a long, controlled breath through his nose. He turns his broad back on the black thoroughbred, effectively walling off the children's line of sight to the threat. He places his heavy hands on the shoulders of the two boys. The touch is firm, guiding them back the way they came. The mercantile door shuts behind them, the cheerful bell ringing one last mocking time. He shortens his stride even further. The walk back to the livery stable is a masterpiece of deception. To the casual observer, he is merely a tired man leading a ragged flock out of the midday sun. But look at his eyes. They scan the rooftops, the gaps between the dilapidated buildings, the dark spaces under the wooden boardwalks. He is plotting sightlines, calculating distances, mapping every piece of dead wood and rusted iron between him and his sanctuary. The heat beats down, hammering the street into a blinding white glare. The dust kicks up around their new boots. The children sense the shift. They do not ask questions. The survival instinct bred into them over months of starvation recognizes the silent alarm radiating from the giant man. The oldest girl pulls the toddler tighter against her chest, her knuckles turning white around the jar of peaches. They reach the livery. The transition from the blinding street to the cavernous gloom of the barn offers no relief. The air inside is stifling, baked under the corrugated tin roof. He does not stop at his usual barrel. He herds them past the empty stalls, moving deeper into the shadows all the way to the rear, where the roan gelding shifts nervously in the dim light. Above them, a rickety wooden loft holds a few remaining bales of dry alfalfa. He points to the rusted iron ladder nailed to the load-bearing beam. He looks at the teenage girl. He points up. No words. The command is absolute. She understands. She climbs, her thin arms shaking as she hovers the toddler over her shoulder. The boys follow, scrambling up the iron rungs like frightened squirrels. The protagonist stands at the bottom, his massive frame anchoring the ladder. Once they are in the loft, he grabs the rusted rungs and pulls. The iron groans resisting, but his shoulders bunch and the heavy nails screech as they are torn from the ancient timber. He drops the ladder onto a pile of soiled hay, burying it. The loft is now completely inaccessible from the ground floor. The camera angles up, looking through the gaps in the floorboards. The four faces peer down at him. He raises a single calloused finger to his lips, a vow of absolute silence. He holds their gaze until the oldest girl nods slowly in the gloom. We cut outside. The camera rests low in the dirt of the main street. 3 sets of boots step down from the boardwalk outside the telegraph office. These are not the scuffed, practical boots of cattlemen. These are mounted with heavy silver-inlaid Mexican spurs that chime with a vicious metallic rhythm. The riders do not walk. They swagger, claiming the oxygen in the street. The camera pans up to the leader, a lean, weathered man wearing a dust-caked bowler hat and a long coat of gray wool entirely unsuited for the desert heat. He wears it like armor. 2 heavy revolvers hang low on his thighs, the holsters tied down with rawhide strips. The leather is polished smooth from constant use. Behind him walk 2 brutes, twin monoliths of unwashed canvas and bad intentions, carrying lever-action rifles casually over their shoulders. They cross the street toward the saloon. Notice the town's reaction. It is different from how they treat the protagonist. The town fears the Hollow Man because he is a dormant volcano. They fear these riders because they are an active wildfire. The blacksmith drops his hammer and steps back into the forge, disappearing into the soot. The few faces lingering in the windows vanish. The saloon doors swing open, and the piano music, which had been haltingly playing, abruptly stops. The silence that follows is thick, heavy, and pregnant with the promise of violence. Inside the livery, the protagonist hears the chime of the silver spurs echoing down the empty street. He recognizes the acoustic signature. His jaw tightens. He walks away from the loft, moving to a specific, unremarkable patch of dirt near the center of the barn. He drops to one knee. He uses his bare hands to sweep away a layer of loose soil and soiled straw, revealing a wide, warped floorboard. He wedges his thick fingers into the crack. The muscles in his forearms cord like steel cables. With a harsh, splintering crack, the board pulls free. Beneath it lies a shallow cavity lined with an oilcloth. He lifts the bundle. It is heavy. He carries it to the wooden barrel near the entrance, staying well within the shadows. The camera pushes in on his hands. He unwraps the oilcloth with slow, deliberate movements. The scent of sulfur, old grease, and cold iron fills the air. He reveals a Colt Dragoon revolver. It is a massive piece of machinery, a 4-pound block of blued steel capable of dropping a horse at 50 yards. It is a relic from a savage war, a tool designed for absolute destruction. He does not load it. Watch his fingers. They trace the brass trigger, guard the scarred walnut grip the heavy cylinder. He is not preparing to fight. He is touching a talisman of his past, grounding himself. He knows that if he loads the weapon, if he puts percussion caps on the nipples, the war begins. If he fires a single shot, the men in the saloon will swarm the livery, and the children in the loft will burn with him. He must swallow his nature. He must endure the proximity of his enemies to protect the fragile lives suspended above him. He wraps the Colt back in the oilcloth and shoves it deep into the pocket of his canvas duster. The weight of the iron settles against his thigh, a heavy cold reminder of the line he is trying not to cross. The afternoon drags on. The heat turns the livery into an oven. The air is stagnant heavy with the smell of horse sweat and dry rot. The protagonist stands perfectly still beside the open double doors, pressing his back against the rough timber wall. He watches the street through the narrow gap between the hinges. The saloon doors swing open. One of the brutes steps out onto the boardwalk. He is laughing a wet, ugly sound that scrapes against the quiet town. He holds a bottle of amber liquor by the neck. He stumbles down the steps, his boots kicking up puffs of alkali dust. He does not head toward the telegraph office. He turns right. He heads straight toward the livery stable. Inside the barn, the tension spikes. The camera tracks the protagonist. He does not reach for the Colt in his pocket. Drawing the gun means noise. Noise means discovery. Instead, his hand drops to a wooden workbench beside him. His fingers close around the long, smooth ash handle of a farrier's rasp. It is a heavy file coated in iron filings, essentially a blunt metal club. The heavy boots crunch on the gravel right outside the livery doors. A shadow long and distorted by the lowering sun bleeds under the wooden frame pooling at the protagonist's boots. The smell of cheap whiskey, stale tobacco, and unwashed sweat drifts through the gaps in the timber. The brute stops right outside. He begins to hum a tuneless melody. We hear the scrape of a match against leather. The sharp sulfur smell cuts through the barn. He is smoking, leaning against the exterior wall of the livery, mere inches from where the protagonist stands on the inside. Up in the loft, the camera finds the children. The stifling heat is taking its toll. The youngest girl's face is flushed red. Her chest heaves. A ragged, wet cough begins to build in her throat. Her small hands clutch at her collar. The teenage girl sees it. Her eyes widen in absolute horror. She drops the jar of peaches. It lands silently on the soft hay. She lunges forward, throwing her thin body over her little sister. She clamps her grimy hand firmly over the child's mouth and nose. The little girl struggles, her eyes rolling back in panic. But the teenager holds tight, her own face contorted in a silent scream of desperation. Down below, the protagonist hears the muffled struggle in the hay. His eyes dart upward, then back to the crack in the door. The brute outside pauses his humming. He tilts his head. The camera shows the side of his face through the gap. He frowns, listening. The silence stretches taut as a piano wire. The protagonist tightens his grip on the farrier's rasp. His knuckles turn bone white. The muscles in his neck stand out in thick ridges. He prepares to swing to crush the man's skull before he can draw breath to yell, knowing full well it will doom them all. For 10 agonizing seconds, the world stops spinning. Only the buzzing of a horsefly breaks the quiet. Then from down the street, a sharp whistle pierces the air. "Cole, get back here!" The voice of the man in the gray coat rings out from the saloon porch. The brute outside the livery grunts. He takes a long drag of his cigarette, flicking the burning butt into the dirt, and pushes himself off the wall. The heavy boots crunch back toward the saloon, the sound fading into the stifling afternoon heat. Inside the barn, the protagonist closes his eyes. He exhales a breath he feels he has been holding for a lifetime. He slowly lowers the rasp, resting it silently back on the bench. Above him, the teenager removes her hand from her sister's mouth. The little girl gasps for air, tears cutting clean tracks down her dusty cheeks, but the sound is buried deep in the hay. The storm has not passed. It has simply gathered, circling the livery, waiting for the sun to drop. The sun finally collapses behind the jagged peaks, taking the punishing heat with it. The desert does not cool gently. It bleeds its warmth into the black sky, replacing the oven with an icebox. The camera pans across the main street. The blinding glare is gone, replaced by a suffocating darkness, broken only by the sickly yellow glow spilling from the saloon windows. The town changes its auditory skin. The dead silence of the afternoon gives way to the muffled, abrasive sounds of men drinking heavily. A poorly tuned piano hammers out a disjointed rhythm, the sharp clatter of a tin cup hitting a wooden bar. A burst of coarse laughter that sounds more like a threat than a celebration. Inside the livery stable, the temperature plummets. The ancient timber beams groan and pop as the wood contracts in the cold. The protagonist stands perfectly still in the center of the dirt floor. The heavy canvas duster is wrapped tightly around his broad shoulders. He stares up at the loft. The shadows conceal the children, but they cannot hide the sound. The youngest girl's cough has worsened. It is no longer a dry hack. It is a wet, desperate rattle scraping against her small lungs. We see the 10-year-old boy in the loft. The camera focuses on his hands. They tremble as he lifts the tin canteen, tilting it completely vertical over his sister's cracked lips. Not a single drop falls. The canteen is bone dry. The fever radiates from the little girl baking the damp hair against her forehead. The teenager rocks her eyes wide and hollow, staring helplessly at the empty tin. The boy looks at the canteen, then peers through the floorboards at the massive shadow standing guard below. He makes a decision. A dangerous, necessary calculation. The boy slides away from his sisters. He moves toward the rear wall of the livery, where the stacked bales of rotting alfalfa create a precarious, uneven staircase to the ground floor. He tests his weight on the top bale. The dry stalks crunch loudly. The boy freezes, squeezing his eyes shut. Down below, the protagonist does not turn his head, but his posture shifts. The slight tilt of his chin indicates he tracks every microscopic rustle in the dark. The boy waits for a burst of laughter from the saloon to mask his movement, then begins his descent. He climbs down the decaying hay splinters, biting deep into his bare palms. He reaches the dirt floor. He does not walk toward the front doors where the giant stands. He slips toward the rear of the barn, sliding through a narrow gap where a warped board has pulled away from the frame. He squeezes his small frame through the opening, disappearing into the black alleyway behind the livery. The air outside is brittle and freezing. The boy shivers violently. He clutches the empty canteen to his chest, pressing his back against the rough exterior of the barn. He edges his way toward the communal water pump, located 50 yards down the alley, a rusted iron sentry standing in a patch of frozen mud. The moonlight catches the metallic glint of the handle. He covers the distance in short, frantic bursts, moving from shadow to shadow. He reaches the pump. He grabs the heavy iron handle. It is freezing, the metal biting into his skin. He pushes down. The mechanism screams, a high, agonizing screech of metal grinding on metal that cuts through the cold air like a razor blade. He pumps again. Water gurgles deep within the pipe, fighting its way to the surface. A shadow detaches itself from the corner of the adjacent building. The camera does not show the man's face, only the massive, irregular bulk of his silhouette blocking the moonlight. It is Cole the Brute from the afternoon. He reeks of unwashed wool, stale sweat, and cheap raw whiskey. He walks with a heavy, uneven gait, the silver spurs on his boots chiming a slow, deadly rhythm. The boy hears the spurs. He freezes his hands, still gripping the pump handle. He turns his head slowly. The water finally crests the lip of the spout, spilling into the dirt with a loud splash. Cole stops 10 feet away. He strikes a match against his thumbnail. The flare illuminates his face. The skin is pitted, his eyes red-rimmed and predatory. He sees the boy. He sees the canteen. A cruel, jagged smile stretches across his face, exposing decaying teeth. He drops the match. "Well, look at this." Cole's voice is a wet gravel scrape. A little desert rat, out past his bedtime. The boy does not speak. He drops the canteen. He spins to run back toward the livery. He makes it 2 steps. Cole lunges. The massive hand clamps down on the collar of the boy's shirt, hauling him off the ground. The boy kicks his legs, his boots finding no purchase in the air. Cole brings the boy close to his face, inhaling deeply. "You smell like dirt and fear." Cole whispers, his breath hot and foul against the boy's face. He reaches to his belt and draws a long, bone-handled hunting knife. He taps the flat of the blade against the boy's cheek. "The boss says we burn this town tomorrow. I reckon I'll start with you. See how much noise a rat makes when it loses a tail." Cut back to the interior of the livery. The protagonist stands by the front doors. He registers the screech of the pump. He registers the silence that follows. He turns around. He looks at the back wall. He sees the gap in the timber. He looks up at the loft. He sees 3 shadows huddled together, not 4. Watch the absolute destruction of his restraint. The internal dam built from years of self-loathing and enforced isolation shatters. The hollow man dies in that exact second. What replaces him is the beast. The phantom weight at his hip is no longer a memory. It is a physical ache demanding satisfaction. But a gunshot will wake the entire gang. He reaches under his canvas duster. His fingers bypass the heavy Colt Dragoon. He pulls the stag-handled Bowie knife from its sheath at the small of his back. The 8-inch carbon steel blade slides free with a terrifying silky hiss. He moves. He does not run. He glides. The massive frame navigates the darkness with the terrifying grace of an apex predator. He slips through the gap in the back wall, his canvas duster snapping softly in the cold wind. He steps into the alleyway. The moonlight washes over him, casting a long black shadow across the frozen dirt. He sees Cole holding the boy. He sees the blade resting against the child's cheek. The protagonist does not shout a warning. He does not demand surrender. He crosses the 30 yards of open dirt in total silence. His boots, heavy and scarred, find the soft patches of earth, making no sound. He approaches the brute from behind. Cole raises the hunting knife, preparing to make a shallow cut on the boy's face, just to hear him scream. The protagonist strikes. His left hand shoots forward wide and unforgiving as a steel trap. He clamps his hand directly over Cole's mouth and nose, crushing the brute's face into his palm. The sheer kinetic force of the impact snaps Cole's head violently backward, exposing the thick column of his throat. Simultaneously, the protagonist's right hand drives the Bowie knife upward. He does not stab blindly. He executes a precise, calculated butchery. The heavy blade enters the soft tissue beneath Cole's ribs, angling sharply upward, sliding smoothly through the diaphragm and piercing the heart. Cole's eyes bulge. The hunting knife slips from his fingers, landing silently in the mud. He thrashes a massive animal, realizing it is already dead. But the protagonist holds him in an iron grip. He twists the blade, ensuring the catastrophic destruction of the organ, then pulls the steel free. He does not let the body fall. A falling body makes noise. He supports the dead weight against his own chest, lowering Cole to the frozen ground with agonizing care. He lays the corpse flat in the dirt. He wipes the dripping blade clean on the dead man's wool coat. The boy stands frozen, trembling violently. He stares at the body, then looks up at the giant standing over him. The protagonist's face is completely devoid of emotion. His slate-gray eyes reflect the pale light of the moon. He is not a shepherd anymore. He is the wolf. He bends down. He picks up the canteen from the dirt. He holds it under the pump and works the iron handle with slow, deliberate strokes, filling the tin to the brim. He screws the cap on and hands it to the boy. He places a heavy, blood-stained hand on the child's shoulder. He turns the boy toward the livery and gives a firm push. The boy runs. The protagonist remains in the alleyway. He looks down at the corpse at his feet. The blood pools darkly in the frost, steaming slightly in the cold air. He looks toward the saloon at the end of the street. The piano is still playing. The laughter still echoes. He reaches under his duster. His hand rests on the heavy walnut grip of the Colt Dragoon. He traces the brass trigger guard. The vow of silence is broken. The red line is crossed. They will find the body. They will follow the blood. The sanctuary is compromised. He looks up at the bleached, indifferent moon. He takes a slow, deep breath, pulling the freezing air and the copper scent of blood deep into his lungs. The hollow man is gone forever. The storm has arrived, and he is its architect. The boy slips back through the warped floorboards, his small chest heaving, clutching the dripping canteen. He scurries toward the rear ladder. The protagonist does not watch him ascend. He turns his back on the loft, effectively severing his connection to the vulnerable cargo above. He moves to the center of the dirt aisle. The camera pushes in on his hands. He unwraps the Colt Dragoon completely. The vow is broken. He must prepare the iron. Watch the mechanical precision of his fingers. He half-cocks the hammer. He rotates the massive cylinder. He reaches into his deep pocket and retrieves a small leather pouch and a brass powder flask. He bites the cork off the flask and pours a measured charge of coarse black powder into the first chamber. He places a conical lead ball over the opening. He unlatches the loading lever beneath the barrel, driving the rammer down with the heel of his hand to seat the heavy bullet. The ratcheting click of the mechanism echoes sharply in the dead quiet of the barn. He repeats this process 5 more times, a slow, agonizing ritual of impending death. Finally, he pinches 6 ribbed copper percussion caps onto the nipples at the rear of the cylinder. He lowers the hammer to rest on an empty chamber. He is ready. Outside, the chiming of spurs has ceased. The silence in the street is absolute, heavier than the desert cold. They have found Cole. The protagonist knows the rhythm of the hunt. They will not shout. They will track the blood. He walks to the heavy double doors. He does not barricade them. A barricade is a cage. Instead, he pulls the right door open, leaving a 3-foot gap. He invites the freezing wind inside. He invites the enemy into a funnel. He retreats 10 paces into the suffocating darkness of the barn, positioning himself directly behind a thick, load-bearing timber beam. The moonlight spills through the open doors, cutting a pale, rectangular shape onto the dirt floor. He stands just outside its reach, completely swallowed by the shadows. We hear the crunch of gravel. Slow, deliberate. Shadows bleed onto the moonlit dirt before the men appear. 3 figures frame themselves in the doorway. The leader in the gray wool coat stands in the center, a revolver already drawn in his left hand. Beside him, the second brute levers a round into his Winchester rifle. The third man, a local tracker, holds a double-barreled shotgun across his chest. The leader steps forward, his boot crossing the threshold into the moonlight. "Burn it to the ash," he whispers, his voice carrying the rasp of dry sandpaper. The protagonist does not wait for a target to fully present itself. He steps out from behind the timber. He raises the 4-pound Colt Dragoon, locking his elbow. He does not aim with one eye closed. He points the heavy iron, relying entirely on muscle memory and the geometry of the room. He fires. The camera shakes with the concussive force. The Dragoon does not simply discharge, it detonates. A foot-long tongue of blinding orange flame erupts from the muzzle, instantly illuminating the cavernous barn in a strobe flash of violent light. The roar is catastrophic. A physical blow that rattles the tin roof and sends dust raining down from the rafters. The .44 caliber lead ball strikes the brute with the Winchester square in the sternum. The sheer kinetic energy lifts his massive frame off his boots, throwing him backward through the open doors to crash heavily into the freezing dirt of the street. Complete chaos ensues. The roan gelding in the back stall screams, kicking wildly against the wooden planks. The air instantly fills with the sharp acidic stench of sulfur and burned grease. The tracker panics. He levels the shotgun and fires both barrels blindly into the darkness. The deafening boom of the scattergun shreds the timber beam where the protagonist stood a second ago. Splinters the size of hunting knives explode through the air, but the protagonist is no longer there. Notice his movement. He does not stand his ground. He drops low, his knees grazing the dirt, moving laterally into the pitch-black shadows of the empty stalls. He tracks the tracker by the muzzle flash of the shotgun. He cocks the Dragoon, the heavy click masked by the ringing in their ears. He fires again. The muzzle flash strobes. The lead ball catches the tracker in the hip, pulverizing the pelvic bone. The man collapses, shrieking, dropping the empty weapon. The leader is a veteran. He does not fire wildly. He throws himself to the side, rolling behind a heavy wooden water trough, just outside the livery doors. He begins to fire his revolver systematically through the thin timber walls of the barn, aiming low, trying to sweep the floor. Bullets punch through the old wood with a sickening thud, kicking up geysers of dirt near the protagonist's boots. The protagonist does not flinch. He presses his back against the wall, calculating the trajectory of the incoming fire. He listens to the rhythm of the leader's shots. 3, 4, 5, 6. The distinctive click of an empty chamber. The protagonist breaches his own sanctuary. He lunges out from the shadows, clearing the open doors in 2 massive strides, stepping right into the freezing moonlight. The leader is crouched behind the trough, frantically trying to reload his cylinder with numb, shaking fingers. The protagonist does not waste his remaining lead. He closes the distance. The leader looks up, his eyes widening in pure animal terror as the giant silhouette blocks out the moon. He raises his empty gun like a shield. The protagonist swings the heavy steel barrel of the Dragoon in a vicious downward arc. The metal crushes the leader's wrist against the rim of the trough. Bone snaps with a wet, sharp crack. The leader screams, his revolver clattering into the frozen mud. The protagonist does not offer a monologue. He does not hesitate. He drops the heavy Colt, his right hand shooting to the small of his back, to draw the stag-handled Bowie knife. In one fluid, terrifying motion, he grabs the lapels of the gray wool coat, hauls the man to his feet, and drives the 8-inch carbon steel blade upward deep into the soft tissue beneath the leader's ribs. He twists the blade, brutally severing the diaphragm before ripping it free in a spray of hot, dark blood. The leader collapses into the mud, his lungs pulling nothing but wet air. The street falls dead silent again, save for the pathetic moans of the tracker bleeding out near the doorway. The protagonist walks slowly toward him. His boots crunch heavily on the frost. He stands over the broken man. The tracker raises a trembling, bloody hand in a silent plea for mercy. The protagonist looks down with empty slate-gray eyes. He brings the heavy heel of his boot down on the man's throat, crushing the windpipe with a sickening crunch. The moaning stops abruptly. The slaughter is complete. It is ugly, unheroic, and brutally efficient. The dust has settled, but the blood will forever stain the timber. Here at Iron Resolve Tales, we explore the raw edges of the frontier where broken men are forced to make impossible choices. Our hollow man washed the grime from his knuckles. But can a man truly bury his nature once the beast has been let off the chain? I want to know where you stand. Did he sacrifice his own fragile redemption by embracing the slaughter, or his absolute unforgiving violence? The only language evil understands when innocent lives are on the line. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If this journey through the harsh grit and quiet sacrifice resonated with you, leave a like on the video. It helps keep our campfire burning. And if you have the stomach for more stories about flawed men navigating a ruthless world, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Settle in. We have plenty more trails to ride together. Until next time, keep your iron heavy and your resolve unbroken.